bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, let's just stop there for a second. Originally, the Passover was a one-day observance. It was followed immediately by a week-long observance called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. By the time you get to the first century, that was regarded as an 8-day observance. Began with Passover, continued right into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They often just called it the Feast of Unleavened Bread. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Passover, all work stopped and the lamb started being slaughtered. About 6 o'clock, they'd start having the Passover meal. As soon as that day was over, they'd go into the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. So, here it is, time for the lambs to be slaughtered, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Jesus' disciples come to him and say, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover?" Think about that. It's 3 hours before the meal. Where do you want us to prepare the Passover? He sent 2 of his disciples and told them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Wherever he enters, tell the owner of the house, the teacher says, 'Where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." Now that was an unusual situation. But you recall, this isn't the only time Jesus gave his disciples some odd instruction. Before he came into Jerusalem on the triumphal entry, he said to them, "By the way, go into town and you'll find a donkey there, and it'll be untied, and just go take it." Say, what? If somebody asks you about it, say the master needs it. Now he knew where that donkey was going to be, and he knew who was going to be there to greet those disciples, right? Things happened exactly like he said. This time the same thing happens. You're going to find a man carrying a water jar. Well, what's so weird about that? Well, the weird thing was men didn't carry water jars. Women and slaves carried water jars. So when you find a man carrying a water jar, that's kind of anachronistic, and okay, we'll go up to this guy and follow him, and he'll take us to a place where we'll say, "Where's the room that we're going to have the Passover?" And he's going to show you the upper room. People who had 2-story houses oftentimes had this upper room, especially in Jerusalem, just for observances like this. They kind of rented them out, like a room for a group to have the Passover together. Originally, the Passover was eaten by one family per lamb, or 2 families, or maybe 3 families per lamb. But what happens is by the time you got the first century, people are coming from all over the world. They're coming into Jerusalem. They need a place to have the Passover, so they find accommodations. Well, this accommodation's in a home where it's a very wealthy home. They have this 2-story upper room where Jesus and his disciples, 13 total, counting Jesus, can have this Passover together, which is the number of people, incidentally, that were supposed to meet together for a Passover meal. He'll show you the large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there. So the disciples left, went into the city, and lo and behold, what do they find? Exactly what he said. Just like they found the donkey, now they find the fellow carrying the water jar, and they prepared the Passover. Then when it was evening, he came to the house with the 12. While they were at the table eating, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, one of you eating with me will betray me." They were distressed, and one by one said to him, "Surely not I." He said to them, "It is one of the 12, one who dips his hand with me into the bowl. For the Son of Man will go as is written about him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for him if he had never been born." While they were eating, he took bread, and after giving thanks, he broke it, gave it to them, and said, "Take it, this is my body." And after taking the cup and giving thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. He said to them, "This is my blood, the blood of the covenant that is poured out for many. I tell you the truth, I will no longer drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." After singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I'm raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even if they all fall away, I will not." Jesus said to him, "I tell you the truth, today, this very night, before a rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, even if I must die with you, I will never deny you. And all of them said the same thing. Jesus and his disciples celebrate Passover. As a part of that Passover, Jesus commemorates the Lord's Supper. And it's a celebration of the Passover. It's just a part of the Passover, though. The Lord's Supper, sometimes it's called communion. It's a commemoration of that event in that upper room. And sometimes you'll hear people refer to it as Eucharist. That comes from Mark 14, where we're told that Jesus gave thanks. Literally, the translation is Jesus blessed it and broke it. Mark 14:23. Tradition says that this was in the home of John Mark's family. No reason to doubt that. But it starts off with an unsettling thing. During the beginning of the meal, really is kind of an appetizer. Dipping the hand in the bowl was something you did before the meal. You saw it this morning in that video. Dipping the pita down into the bread, into the various kinds of condiments that are on the table. In first century culture, those that you ate with were your closest friends. This is a kind of a fellowship. And when Jesus says, someone who dips his hand in the bowl with me is going to betray me, he's saying one of my closest friends is the one that's going to betray me. Now, in the Passover meal, there were actually 4 cups. And the 4 cups come from Exodus chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. The background is God bringing the Israelites out of Egypt. In Exodus chapter 6, God says, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. There was the cup of deliverance. That was the first cup they took at the Passover meal. And then after eating some more, they would go on further. I will take you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. So there's release, there's deliverance, and then there was the third cup. And I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. And then I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. The cup that Jesus used to institute the Lord's Supper is the third of those 4 cups. I will redeem you. Because that's exactly what he's about to do. He's about to accomplish everything that's envisioned by those first 3 cups. Bring you out from under the yoke of slavery, free you from that, and redeem you by what he's about to accomplish. Now, I think that's important because you'll notice after he takes that cup, then he says, I won't take the fruit of the vine again until I drink it anew with you in the kingdom of God. And if I read that correctly, what that means is he never took the 4th cup in that Last Supper. Why? Because it looks forward to what's described in Revelation 19 as the wedding supper of the Lamb, when all of his people are gathered together with him in that great wedding feast. And then he says to the disciples, they sing a hymn, the Hallel Psalms. They come from Psalm 113 to 118. And after they do that, they take a little walk. It's only about 15 minutes to walk from the old city of Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives, going through the valley, the Kidron Valley there. About 15 minutes, and during that time, Jesus says to them, you'll all fall away. The Greek word is skandalizo. We get our word scandal from it. A scandal is something that someone is involved in that we don't want to have anything to do with. And he says, you're all going to fall away from me in that 15 minutes. Now, get this perspective. At the table, Jesus had said, one of you is going to betray me. And then he said, you're all going to deny me. Now he says, you're all going to fall away from me. And this is just in the matter of maybe an hour or two from the time of the meal. In the 15 minutes they walked out to Gethsemane. Peter, bless his heart, I will never deny you. I don't care what everybody else does. I will never deny you. Jesus saw Peter better than Peter saw himself. I don't know why Peter doesn't seem to get it. You know, Jesus sends Peter and John into the city to find that donkey, and things happen just exactly like Jesus says. He sends 2 disciples, probably Peter and John, in to make arrangements for the Passover at the upper room. And, you know, things happen exactly like Jesus says. Now Jesus says, you're all going to fall away from me. You're all going to deny me. And Peter says, maybe all of them, but not me. The problem is Peter's pride gets in his way. He's overconfident. And so Jesus says, you're right, Peter. You're not going to deny me once. You're going to deny me 3 times. Probably Peter thought that remaining with Jesus and not denying him meant fighting for him. That's what he's going to try to do in the garden. He's ready to fight, but he's not ready to be arrested. And so Peter, again, mistrusts what Jesus says. You know, every once in a while, Steven Spielberg gets it right. This quotation comes from Star Wars. Overconfidence is the most dangerous form of carelessness. It comes from the Clone Wars. A few weeks ago, I was listening to a podcast. It's This American Life. I really enjoy listening to that. And they talked about an effect called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? Let me tell you about the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's named after David Dunning and Justin Kruger of Cornell University. And here's the way it goes. The less competent a person is in a particular discipline, the more confident that person is that he's got it all dialed in. The more confident, the more expert a person is in a particular discipline, the less confident that person is that he's got it all dialed in. So, people with very little knowledge, very little experience, often boast of their expertise. People who have a lot of expertise very often don't realize that they are as expert as they really are. And the way it works is this way. They tested a bunch of people. It was interesting. They tested a bunch of students in college with some tests that were not subjective at all. They're fact-based tests. And some of the people who knew very little about the subject matter they were being tested on actually came back to the professors to get the professors to give them the opportunity to say, no, I'm sorry, the score I gave you was wrong. You actually did much better on the test than I thought you did. They were so confident of their knowledge, their expertise. In fact, people who have very little knowledge in a subject sometimes will estimate their expertise at somewhere around the 80th percentile level, while people who are expert in a subject will sometimes also estimate their expertise at somewhere around the 80th percentile level. So, I'm wondering if that might explain some of the stuff that's going on in the political landscape this year. The problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubts, while the stupid ones are full of confidence. Jesus initiates the Last Supper. Why do you think the Last Supper takes place between the prediction of the betrayal by Judas and the denial by the disciples, and then his reminder to the disciples that I'll strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered and you're all going to fall away because of me? And the Lord's Supper takes place right between the two of those. Why do you suppose that is? Could it be because the solution to their problem, their falling away, is what Jesus is about to accomplish on the cross? As a matter of fact, Mark 14, verse 28 is kind of a statement of forgiveness before the falling away actually takes place. After I have been resurrected, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Jesus doesn't say to the disciples, well, you're all going to fall away from me. That's it. I'm done with you. I'm going to start over with somebody else. What he says is, you're all going to fall away when you come to your senses. Come find me. I'll be in Galilee. The third test is a test of preparation. Mark 14, verses 32 to 42. Then they went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John with him and became very troubled and distressed. He said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved, even to the point of death. Remain here and stay alert." Going a little further, he threw himself to the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour would pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "Simon, are you sleeping? Couldn't you stay awake for 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away again and prayed the same thing. When he came again, he found them sleeping. They could not keep their eyes open, and they did not know what to tell him. He came a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough of that. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us go. Look, my betrayer is approaching." This is the way Gethsemane looks today. Some of the olive trees there are 1,000 years old. Some of the oldest things on the planet. It was in this place that Jesus, 15 minutes away from the upper room, maybe a half an hour away from where the crucifixion is going to take place, he is going through his preparation to fully obey the will of the Father. Now, look at the way Jesus approaches the next few hours and contrast with that with the way the disciples approach the next few hours. Jesus knows it's impossible to cram for this kind of a test. He had to prepare beforehand. The disciples, on the other hand, well, they were remiss in their preparation. While Jesus is praying, they're sleeping. Here's the greatest test that they're ever going to face in their lives, and they can't stay awake to study. I don't know if you can remember back in your college days. Do you ever remember pulling an all-nighter? When you pulled an all-nighter, pardon me, when you pulled an all-nighter, it was because you didn't feel like you had a good grasp on the subject matter. And so you're trying to cram it into your head and hoping it'll stay there long enough that you can take the test. Right? We've all done it at some point in time, right? The problem is this. You may keep that knowledge in your head long enough to pass the test, but then pretty quickly it's gone, right? Now, answer this to yourself. How many of you want a medical doctor who crammed for the boards? I don't think so. We want somebody who knew what they were doing going in and taking that test, right? Finally, we have a test of perseverance, Mark 14, verses 43 to 52. Right away, while Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him came a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent by the chief priests and experts in the law and elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." When Judas arrived, he went up to Jesus immediately and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Then they took hold of him and arrested him. One of the bystanders, we know from another gospel, it's Peter, drew his sword and struck the high priest's slave, cutting off his ear. Incidentally, all that tells you is that Peter was not a great swordsman. He was not aiming for Malchus's ear. Jesus said to them, "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me like you would an outlaw? Day after day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, yet you did not arrest me. But this has happened so the scriptures will be fulfilled." Then all the disciples left him and fled. A young man was following him, wearing only a linen cloth. We believe that's probably John Mark. They tried to arrest him, but he ran off naked, leaving his linen cloth behind. Peter's the one who says, "I'll never forsake you, not in a million years." And yet, when it comes to the choice between being arrested with Jesus and fleeing from him, Peter's willing to fight for him, but he's not willing to be arrested for him. And notice the contrast between the beginning of this section and the end. This section begins with Jesus surrounded by his friends in an upper room, having that Passover meal together in fellowship. It ends with Jesus all by himself. Because even though they maintained the best of intentions, when put to the test, every last disciple abandoned him. What would it take for you to fall away? That's what that Greek word skandalizo means. What would it take for you to fall away from Jesus? A scandal is an offensive thing that we refuse to participate in. What is there that you're unwilling to do for God? What area of weakness would prevent you from persevering in your faith and finishing strongly? The disciples faced 4 tests. They failed every one. So what Jesus said in our meditation verse was true. You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. You know the tests that you faced. You and the Lord know whether you succeeded or failed, and how many you failed, and how badly you failed. You know whether that Dunning-Kruger effect applies to your Christian life or not. If your life is not what it ought to be, we want to give you the opportunity to make the changes you need to make. One of the elders will be in the back, in the middle school classroom to talk with you if you have something you need to share, something to pray about. I'll be down at the front if you need to come forward. If there's some way we can help you to prepare for the most important test of your life, the test that has to do with your relationship to God, let us know how we can help. Let's be standing and sing.